Hello, America. I want to talk to you about something that's probably not on your radar because hurricane barreling into Florida, the mess already for the hurricane from last week. And the election is coming up in just a few weeks. I mean, the world is on fire, but I want to talk to you about war. And the reason why I want to talk to you about this, Donald Trump has said multiple times, as has Elon Musk, that nuclear war is the biggest threat to the United States right now than it has possibly ever been, certainly in our lifetime. So why is no one talking about this? As the war starts to heat up, how did all of this stuff happen and where is it headed? We're going to cover it tonight and then move on to other things. But this is something that America needs to understand before you go to the ballot box. You have Iran hatching an attempted assassination of the president. You have Iran hacking into a presidential campaign and trying to get it to the White House. They are the author of chaos in the Middle East. Israel is their sworn enemy. Israel has taken them on. Oh, and by the way, Iran's partner in all of this, Russia. So we might want to pay attention to what Russia's doing, what Iran is doing, and how all of these wars are shaping up. Okay, let's start here. Let's start on how did we get here first in the Middle East. This week, the one-year anniversary of October 7th, the massacre of over 1,200 Israelis and Jews by Hamas in Israel. It was the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, and to call it a slaughter doesn't really do it justice. As I shared earlier this year on radio, I have seen the confidential footage that has not been showed publicly of the Hamas killers carrying out their mission. The video is too horrific for words. This was sadistic, pedophilia involved with dead children. Murder really cannot be explained in this particular way other than absolutely demonic. And we got a lot of that seemingly going around now. Hamas, the terrorist group, fully backed by Iran, also took 251 hostages. 105 hostages have been released. Israeli forces have recovered the bodies of 37, and 97 hostages remain captive, including 7 Americans. Where are we on that? We don't even talk about it. Nightline started because of 444 days behind enemy lines in in Iran when they did this last time. That's how Nightline started. We're not even talking about it now. The Israeli government says at least 34 of the 97 are dead, but thinks the death toll is likely much higher in some ways. I hope so, because I can't imagine what they've gone through. One of the 4 Americans still to be believed to be alive is a 65-year-old Keith Siegel. His wife Aviva was also taken hostage, but she was among a group of women and children released last November. She recently spoke to NBC News. Listen.
What helped me was Keith was with me. I've been married to Keith for 43 years. Most of the times we weren't allowed to even whisper. So we used to just look at each other in the eyes, and the look between us was with so much love, and it just was so special because we weren't alone, we were together. Sometimes I allow myself to think about him coming home and me jumping on him and screaming and being happy and making him piles of pancakes because he loves pancakes. But then, after thinking that, I go back to real life and I understand Keith is not here. Who will scream for Keith? Who will scream for the hostages to come back? I'm going to keep strong and I'm going to scream as loud as I can. Anybody that will hear me, I'm going to beg.
Meanwhile, in the past year, it's brought some dark truths into light for America, namely the anti-Semitic Jewish sentiment that is far too common in our nation. There's a newly released FBI data that reports over 1,800 Jewish hate crimes committed in 2023. That's the highest number ever recorded since the FBI began tracking hate crime data. In the first 3 months following the October 7th Hamas attacks, anti-Semitic incidences increased 360% in the U.S. American college campuses they've been a cesspool of anti-Israel protests. Already this fall semester, 2 Jewish students were assaulted with a glass bottle at the University of Pittsburgh. A report released last month by Columbia University's Anti-Semitism Task Force detailed how Jewish students at an Ivy League school were, quote, chased out of their dorms, received death threats, spat upon, stalked, and pinned against walls. Is this who we are, America? In July, there was an under-the-radar announcement from the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, confirming that the government of Iran is providing financial support for the anti-Israel protesters on U.S. college campuses. Okay. Didn't we just give them a pallet full of cash? It is pathetic, but really not surprising considering how the Obama-Biden-Harris regime has been playing footsie with Iran for years. Their efforts to make deals with the terrorist state have led the U.S. to a very dangerous precipice of war in the Middle East. Donald Trump almost had choked them out, but we gave them money as soon as Biden-Harris got in. Since October 8th last year, the terrorist group Hezbollah, also fully backed by Iran, has launched over 8,000 rockets from Lebanon into Israel, with the strikes happening almost every single day. Hezbollah has said the launches will continue until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. As a result of this onslaught, 68,000 Israelis had to be evacuated from northern Israel and for the past year have been living in other parts of the country with family, friends, or in hotels. Last month, Israel finally said, enough. They launched an attack in which they triggered hidden explosives in pagers used by Hezbollah terrorists, which it killed at least 37 people, injured around 3,000 of the bad guys. Well, naturally, some Democrats were outraged, including AOC, who demanded to know whether the U.S. was involved. Like we're going to tell you. The UN promptly denounced Israel, of course, including President Erdogan of Turkey, who urged the UN to use force if its Security Council fails to stop Israel's fighting against Hamas and Hezbollah. The UN General Assembly even passed a resolution by a vote of 124 to 14 to make the Old City, part of Jerusalem, free of all Jews within a year. Well, that sounds inclusive. Fortunately, the U.S. voted against it. Not really in the mood to play games, with the UN. Israel barred the UN General Secretary from ever setting foot in Israel because of the way he is presiding over this international anti-Israel bias. France and the U.S. scrambled to propose a 21-day ceasefire. Hamas wasn't interested, and Israel promptly said, yeah, I think we're going to stick with actually defending ourselves. Thank you. And that's what they're currently doing. They've taken out thousands of Hezbollah rockets, and Israeli troops have begun ground operations in southern Lebanon. 2 weeks ago, they told the people of Lebanon, get out. You're being used as meat shields, and they dropped 80 tons of bombs that burrowed into a bunker where Hezbollah's top leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was hiding. He was killed, along with several other Hezbollah leaders. The U.S. government's response to Israel's offensive surge against Hezbollah has been, a little mushy, kind of like the oatmeal that Joe Biden mixes, Joe's crushed vitamins and pills into. At first, the U.S. tried to distance itself from Israel's actions. Heaven forbid we actually offend some terrorists. When asked last week about the start of Israel's operation in Lebanon, here's what Biden said.
Are you aware of that? Are you comfortable with their plan?
I'm more aware than you might know, and I'm comfortable with them stopping. We should have a ceasefire now.
So once again, the Biden-Harris administration is incapable of taking a firm stance. Well, I take that back. You want to say your daughter is always your daughter, no matter what she chooses at 12. They got a firm stand on that one. White people are bad. They got a firm stance on that one. Abortion, you bet. They're standing up strong. Climate change, same thing. But Israel, I don't know. Politico reported last week that the U.S. officials are quietly backing Israel's offensive against Hezbollah, and now we're sending more troops and aircraft to the Middle East as the risk of all-out war escalates. The last Tuesday, Iran launched 180 missiles at Israel, including Tel Aviv. Now, Israel's Iron Dome system, along with the U.S. Navy, shot down most of the missiles, thank God. But meanwhile, the Democratic Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, blamed Benjamin Netanyahu for escalating violence. They were shooting the missiles out of the day after Iran's missile attack on Israel. President Biden said the U.S. opposes Israel striking Iran's nuclear sites. And that Israel's response should be proportional. Can I ask you this proportional thing? Because I don't think I get it. I mean, the left is always just fascinated and obsessed with this, keeping things proportional. In war, how can anyone remotely determine a standard for proportionality? You know what I mean? Israel is fighting for its survival. River to the sea. That means wipe out all the Jews in Israel. Those missiles from Iran, they weren't, while they were pretty in the sky, they're not fireworks. They were meant to kill as many Israelis as possible. But the U.S., especially under the Biden White House, is always tugging Israel's arm as if to say, okay, all right, that's enough. You can defend yourself, just not too much. Isn't that the point of having their own land? Because they've been told, shut up, sit down, stay in the shadows. And then in the end, those shadows end up being concentration camps. It is truly remarkable that no other nation on the planet gets treated like Israel, except for us when we think we should defend ourselves. The sick, twisted part of all of this is that while the U.S. tries to play parent to Israel, making sure they're home by curfew and that they only TP the neighbor's house a little bit, we're also slipping a $100 bill into the neighborhood mob boss, meaning Iran. There is just so much irony in the Secretary of State Antony Blinken's publishing of an op-ed the same day that Iran launched its missile attack on Israel last week, in which Blinken bragged on the Biden administration's, quote, clear-eyed approach to dealing with Iran. Really? This clear-eyed approach? I don't think it seems to be working, you know? Iran can pretty much, count on the U.S. never retaliating in any significant way to whatever Iran feels like doing. And they can count on the U.S. always restraining Israel. It's none of our business. I don't want to hit Iran unless they screw with us. And not only that, the U.S. has completely changed Iran's financial prospectus under Biden. In an effort to resuscitate the failed Iran nuclear deal, the Biden-Harris administration freed up an estimated of $71 billion in sanctions relief for Iran. $71 billion. Do you think they spent that on the people? Maybe, hey, here's some money. Here's $750. Go out and buy your wife a nice dress. I don't think so. During the Obama-Biden administration, the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran contained a specific provision that ended restrictions on Iran's development of ballistic missiles. Why would you do that? This is why Hezbollah has a seemingly never-ending supply that they've been lobbing toward Israel almost every day for a year. Just last week, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen fired dozens of missiles and drones at U.S. Navy targets in the region. We had people like Crazy Town, who's the guy that sleeps with guys in Carolina? Lindsey Graham. That should have made news. What the hell? Disregard. The Biden-Harris White House says they're trying to prevent a larger Middle Eastern conflict, but their actions fuel the fire that is now spreading, and it's only pushing us closer and closer to a major war. When I said sleeping, I was thinking of missiles, which obviously made me think of, you know what I'm saying. So he just loves missiles. That's all I would. Meanwhile, with several crises brewing, our supposed commander-in-chief gives answers like this every week.
Any comment on the strikes in Yemen, Mr. President?
That's spring in his step.
Both sides have got to settle the strike. Support the collective bargaining effort. I think they'll settle the strike.
No idea what he said. I just liked the way he was walking. No, he was asked about the strikes in Yemen, referring to the Houthis firing on the U.S. Navy, and the president thinks, it's about the dock workers' strike. We are bumbling our way toward some dark Hollywood comedy here, and I mean very dark. Well, except for that big flash in the sky. Don't look directly at it. And it's not just in the Middle East. The U.S. is facing an even greater danger in Eastern Europe. Oh, we're going to go there next. So it's not too much of a stretch to assume that if you have a dog, you like that dog, right? Well, I shouldn't assume that because my wife had a dog and I hated that dog because that dog hated me. And it's the only dog ever in the history of my life that didn't like me. I'm a lovable guy. Anyway, so disregard the Ella incident there. When you have a dog, you love your dog, right? You want to feed them the best thing. You want to make sure that they have all of the vitamins, probiotics, antioxidants, the stuff, again, that Jill, mashes down and then stirs into, the oatmeal for Joe. Except this is for dogs. You want Rough Greens, not a dog food. It's a supplement developed by naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black. You sprinkle it on the dog's food. They have a healthier life. I think, personally, Uno has had a longer life. Brown food is dead food. You want the green stuff. They're going to send you a free bag, a trial bag of Rough Greens. All you have to do is pay for the shipping. Just call them. You can call roughgreens.com/Beck right now at 833-GLEN33. That's 833-GLENN33. It's roughgreens.com/Beck. I think that might have been mis or disinformation, what I said, because I have no evidence of that at all. I mean, I think it's happening, but I don't think there's any evidence of it. Anyway, have you noticed that there is a slight difference between the way Biden-Harris treats Israel and that conflict versus the conflict in Ukraine? Now, this is crazy. If you have complete moral clarity when it comes to defending Ukraine, how is it you don't have moral clarity when it comes to Hamas versus Israel? Israel and Ukraine both being assaulted daily by an aggressor state that doesn't want them to exist anymore as a nation. For Ukraine, it's basically here's a blank check. Do whatever you want. You need some missiles? Yeah, target Putin in his house. It's fine. Wait a minute. There's a constant threat of triggering nuclear war with Russia. But for Israel, it's, we got to cut the funding. We got to at least threaten to cut the funding. It's boycott, divestment, sanctions, right? You question every move Israel makes. It's moral outrage when they defend themselves too hard by taking out terrorists with pagers and walkie-talkies. With Israel, every possible casualty is tracked and obsessed over. With Ukraine, notice we don't really know what the number is on how many people have died. Might be 12, might be 12 million. We have no idea. Why is ceasefire and diplomacy forever the only option for Israel? But Ukraine, we got to win this one. Yeah, we're going to topple Putin. When Netanyahu arrived to speak in Congress in July, half of the Congress, the Democrats, the congressional Democrats, refused to attend. Half. Representative Rashida Tlaib, who we all love, was there, holding up a sign that said, "Guilty of genocide, war criminal." That was great. You could just flip in case he didn't catch it. He didn't know what genocide meant. War criminal. When Zelensky spoke to Congress, he got standing ovations from everybody was there. The clear message is Russia, evil, got to be stopped at all costs from taking Ukraine, because otherwise Russia's going to march all across Europe. But if you don't stop Iran in Lebanon and Gaza, what happens to Israel? What's the difference here? Because there has to be one. Well, there does happen to be a lot of Jews in Israel, and I think that's a lot of people still have a huge problem with Jews, and their homeland, if that's what they want to call it. Several things can be true at the same time. For instance, Putin is an evil dictator. And I don't want Russia to take over Ukraine. But I also don't think the U.S. should go to war with Russia. Just call me crazy. I'm kind of old-fashioned that way, At the same time, I don't trust Ukraine. I don't trust the Obama, Biden, Harris regime, along with the Clintons, and any involvement over in Ukraine. I distrust Ukraine, but that doesn't make me pro-Putin. I think he's a murderer. Is it really too much to ask of our own government that we not have a double standard? You're not going to believe this, but our government has a double standard when dealing with bad guys. Yeah, it's just like at home. They go after the victim, and then they let the bad guy out to stab more people. That's weird. We don't do that with Russia, but we do that with Israel. That's weird. So we have a tri-standard, really. Do we throttle Russia with sanctions while we coddle Iran with sanctions relief? I'd really prefer we don't see a flash, and then look at it and all go blind. But don't worry about blindness, because you're going to be vaporized. I would like to avoid nuclear war. But the Biden-Harris team just keeps inching closer and closer to World War III. 2 weeks ago, Zelensky made his latest visit to the United States, where we gave him a check. Nothing for you in Appalachia. Nothing. Well, $750. It's a loan. But he presented his victory plan. His plan basically involves Ukraine being guaranteed NATO membership. Isn't that what started all of this? He also wants permission to fire American long-range missiles into Russia, which Russia has said they will launch nukes at us, because then that will be an act of war from the United States. But Zelensky visited a munitions factory in Scranton, Pennsylvania, with the Democratic governor, Josh Shapiro. It was great. Seemed more of a campaign trail photo op, when Biden quickly pledged another $8 billion to Ukraine for the war. Nothing. Would you shut up in Appalachia? Shut up. Oh, I don't have a home. We're talking about the money for Ukraine. The messaging was clear. Keep the war going on in Ukraine, help provide factory munitions jobs for Pennsylvanians. But the video of the officials, autographing the artillery shells, I don't think that's going to de-escalate things with Russia. Do you? Biden's latest $8 billion pledge includes artillery ammo, and air defenses, anti-tank missiles, and maybe we can wish for Christmas. Has the catalog come in for the long-range missiles yet? $5.5 billion of that money comes from something called the Presidential Drawdown Authority, in which the president can transfer money from the Defense Department directly to foreign governments without any kind of congressional approval. Can I ask you, does Congress have any powers left? Or, the executive branch just seems to have it all. Yeah, I got my executive branch checkbook. How much you need? Since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, this is going to piss you off, the U.S. has provided over $174 billion in assistance to Ukraine. Let me give you some perspective on that, because I don't know who you are or what you think now, but billion kind of seems like a small number now. But it's really not. That number is 2.5 times the entire U.S. Department of Homeland Security budget for next year. We sent them twice as much as we spend protecting the homeland. That doesn't seem reasonable. Now, the value of the weapons and equipment alone that the U.S. has provided Ukraine is more than all other contributing nations combined. And so far, this investment has earned us a total stalemate in Ukraine. But we might be able to see if those nukes actually work. Let's dust them off. It's accelerating now, closer to the brink of war with Russia than we've been since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. Why do I bring this up? I don't know. I think vaporization's a big deal. Zelensky desperately wants permission to use long-range missiles from NATO to shoot at Russia. No. And Biden is under increasing pressure to give in, even though the U.S. intelligence is reportedly unconvinced that the missiles would be as effective as Ukraine wishes they'd be. Wait, we're talking about this? We're actually, well, I don't know. Would that be effective or not? They've said if we give them and we put them on, that they will vaporize us. What is there to discuss? The consequence of getting this decision wrong? Vaporization, but no big deal. Yet, the European Union Parliament recently voted in favor of a non-binding resolution asking EU countries to, quote, immediately lift restrictions on the use of Western weapon systems delivered to Ukraine against the legitimate military targets on Russian territory. The British government has already voiced support for allowing Ukraine to use British-supplied long-range missiles. Oh, this is going to be good. You know what? It's going to be baby's first Christmas, and quite possibly baby's last Christmas. Prime Minister met with Biden a few weeks ago to discuss the issue, and the Washington Post editorial board recently insisted, quote, Ukraine needs the long-range missiles before the winter's onset. Oh, hey, Washington Post, you know where else democracy dies? Yeah, in nuclear winter. President Biden is reportedly still unclear, on what he'll decide about letting Ukraine use our long-range missiles or not. Now, besides the senility thing, how is he still remotely unclear about this? And bringing in the senility thing, should he be the guy we're asking, right? It seems like a total no-brainer, which he is absolutely qualified to do. But it's terrifying that Biden is still the commander-in-chief. Or is he? Yes, Putin kept changing his red line after we let Ukraine use our tanks, after they used our F-16s from NATO, after they got permission to try a ground operation inside Russia. You know, Putin hasn't followed through on his red line threats, but do we want to risk that it's going to keep going that way? Come on, roll the dice. What's at stake? Just the entire world and life on the planet itself. Who in their right mind doesn't think that explosions going off inside Mother Russia, courtesy of might in the US of A, isn't going to send Putin over the edge? I know if they put missiles in Mexico or in Canada and launched them even to places like Buffalo, we'd have a problem with that. By even considering letting Ukraine use our long-range missiles, the Biden-Harris team is taking a wild gamble because, according to Putin, this time it's different. Putin warned, quote, this will mean that NATO countries, the United States, European countries, are at war with Russia. I don't know. He's a stone-cold killer. Doesn't seem to mind a lot of bloodshed and death. Nah, let's roll the dice. Now, if you grew up during the Cold War like I did, you understand how incredible and chilling those words are. I'll show you several alarming reasons why we should take his words seriously and literally next. You know, I don't know about you. A Friday, I'm asking you to join me on a fast just to ask the Lord, hey, would you forgive us for a lot of stuff? And could you just kind of hold off on all the punishment and the smoting stuff that you might have up your sleeve? Please give us another chance, Lord. That is Friday. One of the things, I mean, I'm convinced that if we don't align ourselves with God's side, because he's not on any side, he's on everybody's side. We need to be on his side, and unless we do that, we ain't gonna make it. But one way to do that is by saving his children, not just the babies with the ministry of preborn. They empower and save moms in a crisis, help them choose life. So you rescue the baby, and surprise, surprise, the mom. When a woman considering abortion visits a preborn center, she gets to hear her baby's heartbeat and meet that precious child on an ultrasound. It's a divine encounter, and it doubles the chance that she's going to choose life for her baby. Now, also, we save the mom, because the other thing that goes into abortions is either they don't see it as a baby or they don't have any support from anyone. We have to change the hearts and minds of people, and that's what preborn does. They give the ultrasound, and then they tell mom, you're not alone. And for 2 years, they're with mom and the baby, providing all kinds of stuff that the baby needs. To donate, dial pound 250, say the keyword baby. That's pound 250, keyword baby, or go to preborn.com/Glenn. You know, we are so desensitized by the daily grind of existential threats in the news that this one really not getting the level of airtime it deserves. Recently, Russia officially changed its nuclear weapons policy. Previously, their policy was that they could use nuclear weapons only in the event that they were under attack from a nuclear attack from another nuclear-armed power, or if a conventional warfare situation threatens the very existence of the state of Russia. But they got a brand new policy now. Russia, the new policy states, may use nuclear weapons if it gets attacked with conventional missiles, and Russia will consider any assault on it that is supported by a nuclear power to be a joint attack. So this, of course, is a direct response to the debate happening in the White House and among NATO nations right now about, should we give them the long-range missiles, Bob? They're going to be provided by the U.S., Britain, and France to attack targets inside of Russia. Now, they can debate all day long whether Putin is bluffing yet again, but the fact that Russia changed its official nuclear policy over this is nothing to scoff at. The same people who say, Donald Trump is dangerous, it's going to get us all killed. Why? Because he says things that are scary to dictators? Right. You're not willing to take his word that he's not going to use them, but you'll take Putin's? A Putin advisor and renowned Russian political scientist who pushed for changing Russia's nuclear policy recently said, and I quote, "The main purpose of this updated nuclear doctrine should be convincing all existing and future adversaries that Russia is ready to use nuclear weapons." Now, he said, I'm not calling for treading a dangerous path. I'm calling for saving the world and Russia. Either we win this war or we fall apart. Our adversaries should know that our president will make this decision to launch a nuclear strike or to delegate the right to do so to someone else. Readiness to do this is his duty to the country, the world, and God. Clearly, Russia's kind of framing their war with Ukraine as an existential crisis for Russia, which we frame it that way too. Just last week, in reference to Russia's updated nuclear policy, Putin's press secretary said, quote, "We must be ready to implement them," making the situation even a little more perilous. The Belarusian president, Lukashenko, recently declared that Russia's revised nuclear doctrine applies to any attack on Belarus as well. I can't find Belarus on a map. I don't even know where it is. Their president said an attack against Belarus will trigger World War III. We tell the Western nations openly, the red line is the state border. You step on it and we will respond immediately. We are preparing for this. Great. Putin is under pressure from hawkish officials in his government. They have people like Lindsey Graham, too, to restore nuclear deterrence. They apparently think the glory days of the Cold War kept the world properly balanced because of mutually assured destruction. Some in the Russian government are calling for Russia to conduct its first nuclear test since 1990 to serve as a wake-up call to the West. We'll still be dead asleep. Just a few weeks ago, Russia's nuclear testing site chief said about his facility, quote, "We're ready in its entirety. If the orders come, we can start testing at any moment." Now, concerning the belief among many Western leaders that Russia would never use nuclear weapons, one of Russia's top security experts said, and I quote, "This is a serious misconception. At some point, nuclear weapons will be used despite the risk of escalation and general catastrophe." The rhetoric coming from those in Putin's circles seemed to confirm that assessment. Former Russian President Medvedev, who is the deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, recently wrote on his Telegram channel about the West's failure to believe that Russia will order a nuclear strike. He said, and I quote, "It will be the end, a giant gray molten stain on the site of Kyiv." Then he added in English, "Holy crap, it's impossible. But it just happened," end quote. So if you don't believe their words, I like to take people who want to kill you at their word. Russia's actions are speaking pretty loudly. They're clearly ramping up for a larger conflict. We shouldn't be a part of that. Last week, Putin ordered the conscription of another 133 troops in Russia's autumn draft. His aim is to grow Russia's military force to 1.5 million active service members, which will make them the second largest force after China. Okay, we've got people transitioning, so they can't really soldier right now. Russia plans to increase its military spending by 30% next year, and Russia recently held its largest naval exercise since the Soviet era, with 90,000 troops, 400 vessels, and 125 aircraft. In announcing the exercise, Putin claimed that the U.S. is provoking an arms race. Now, on the ground in Ukraine, Russia continues to raise the stakes. Their aerial glide bombs now weigh 3,000 pounds, 6 times larger when they were first invading Ukraine in 2022. I want to show you some footage of the Russian vacuum bomb. There it is. This is one of the world's largest non-nuclear bombs, which was dropped on a Ukrainian town just last week. Also last week, the Russian drone strike hit a checkpoint at a ferry crossing that connects Ukraine and Romania, which is a NATO country. And Poland, also a NATO member, says that Russian missiles have entered Polish airspace repeatedly since the start of the war. This is great. This summer, Poland considering shooting down Russian missiles that were over Ukrainian airspace. Russia's aggression and NATO's response walks a line that's getting thinner and thinner every day. I think it's taking Ozemka. NATO is preparing now for mass troops casualties, working on logistics on how to transport wounded soldiers away from the front lines in a war with Russia. Why are we doing that? Their planning involves the use of hospital trains, which sounds straight right out of World War II. Some European cities are even refurbishing their old nuclear bunkers from the Cold War, which is great. Ukraine has turned into the same kind of proxy war battlefield that we saw in Korea and Vietnam during the Cold War. Not good. And yet, the outgoing NATO chief said last week that his only regret is not arming Ukraine sooner. He added, and I quote, "I pushed for crossing all those red lines that Putin has put up, and we've crossed many of them, and he hasn't done anything." The reality is that President Putin wants to escalate with the use of weapons of mass destruction. He can create all the excuses he needs, but so far, we've called his bluff. Oh my gosh, you'd want to talk about stupid last words. So, what are we doing? Because this is an insane gamble. Again, I don't want Russia to take over Ukraine or Europe, But there's got to be a better way than spending $174 billion to reboot the Cold War and taunt a madman who sits on the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons. Now, back in a minute, because we're going to go back to Iran. Some new threats converging just in time for Election Day. A poly crisis could be next. All right. When one of your family members gets sick, that's the very first thing you start to do, right? You worry. It's natural. Tons of things to worry about. It's just not a simple one or two. What if you could take at least some of that worry off your plate, especially if you happen to be on vacation or the world's gone to hell in a handbasket and you didn't have to worry that certain medications would be out of stock at the pharmacy when you need them? Wouldn't that be amazing in and of itself? There is something you can do to ensure you and your loved ones have the medications on hand when needed. It's a solution thousands of people have already discovered. And so start stocking up now. The U.S. relies on China for over 80% of its generic medication. Preparing now really is the only recourse we have in case something happens that, stops the critical supply of medicine, just even for a while. The Jace case is a personalized emergency medication kit that contains essential antibiotics and medications that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. Go to jace.com, enter the promo code Beck at checkout for a discount on your order. That's promo code Beck at jase.com. I hear all the time people say, we've been this bad before. No, we haven't. We're playing a giant game of Jenga right now. And Russia is working hard to expand their relationships with America's primary enemies. This Friday, Putin is scheduled to meet with Iran's president for the first time. That'll be great. They have a lot to discuss. After all, Iran has been providing Russia with hundreds of ballistic missiles for Russia's war on Ukraine. And remember back in 2022 when the Biden-Harris administration made that prisoner swap deal with Russia? Yeah, we got our WNBA player back, Brittany Griner, and Russia got Victor Bout. They know him as, you might know him even, as the Merchant of Death for his notorious career as an international arms dealer. Well, who could have seen this one coming? The Merchant of Death is back in the game, reportedly now selling arms to the Houthis in Yemen. So that's great. That's the same Iran-backed terrorists who are shooting at U.S. Navy ships in the Middle East. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal report, Houthi representatives are recently in Moscow discussing the potential purchase of anti-tank missiles and anti-aircraft weapons, which would be great. In June, Putin traveled to North Korea, met with Kim Jong-un. They signed a new defense agreement, which is great, through which North Korea now has already provided military aid to Russia, including millions of artillery shells and even troops on the ground in Ukraine, with apparently more on the way. Between the Middle East tensions and the Ukrainian crisis, it's almost too easy to forget about China simmering in the background. 2 weeks before the Ukraine invasion, Putin visited Beijing, where Russia and China announced a no-limits partnership. They're going to go all the way. In their joint statement, they described Taiwan as, quote, an inalienable part of China. Now, having Russia on their side on this issue will make any conflict over Taiwan even more complicated for the U.S. China denies, of course, that it is supplying Russia with any weapons for use in Ukraine. They're smarter than we are, you see. But the U.S. State Department insists that at the very least, China is providing components and technology that Russia is using in weapon systems. And a recent report details evidence that Russia has a weapons project to develop and build attack drones in China. That's great. Russia clearly building an updated version of the Axis power with Iran, North Korea, China. Wow. And the main thing they all have in common is their mutual hatred for America. No, seriously. They hate us, all of them. They'd all like to see the great Satan, otherwise known as the U.S., taken down. What? Iran has been especially brazen recently with plots to assassinate Donald Trump. 2 weeks ago, federal prosecutors charged 3 Iranian men for hacking the Trump campaign and stealing documents, which they then passed on to the Harris campaign. You didn't hear that? Yeah. Another one has been indicted for spying for Iran. Since 2017, he's been working as a contractor for the FAA, the airplane people. He's charged with downloading sensitive documents about the FAA systems and personally delivering them to Iran in 2022. Also charged with passing Iranian information about U.S. airports and traffic control towers. But what could they do? I mean, who's going to use an airplane as a weapon? With Election Day now less than 4 weeks away, we're facing what I like to call a polycrisis. Now, I can't remember another election day with as much potential chaos bubbling under the surface. Oh, did you hear today? Just to add to the polycrisis, a polycrisis is, all these things coming together, multiple crises at the same time, never waste it. All related but separate, but related to each other. The latest polycrisis today was that there is, you're going to love this, there was assassins going to assassinate people like you at the malls from ISIS. They were here. The government let them in. Biden let them in. But that was just going to happen on Election Day. Then you have, of course, Hurricane Helene. Whew. Oh, you know what's happening right now? Yeah. You have Hurricane Milton. And then back in January, just in time for January kids to start the new year, we have another labor strike. Don't worry, this is easy to navigate. Then we have the border crisis, Hey, did you hear about that mayor and everyone on his staff that was beheaded by the drug gangs in Mexico? Yeah, that's cool. Nothing like that here, though. Of course, we have a financial crisis. Ooh, I don't like any of my choices. I don't, but we're going to have to go for one of them. A financial crisis is brewing, which is great. So we got that. Oh, and then we have the assassination plots. Assassination plots. Election interference or election fraud. See, we're not teetering at all. This is great. Okay. We then have a war with Iran. That's very possible. And then nuclear war with Russia that seems to be brewing. That one's really good. And then we have somebody who wants to reimagine America, and destabilization is the key. What could possibly go wrong? We're completely stable. Right? Destabilizing us, also the goal of Russia, Iran, North Korea, China. But we got it. We're fine. Nothing to see here. Good night, America.